This is hell.
Working for Amazon can be brutal. The hours are long, the job itself is incredibly precarious, while imposing downward pressure on wages as well as the work environment itself, let alone the damage done to the natural environment outside the warehouse walls. Here to help us have a better understanding of what work is like at Amazon, Allesandro Delfanti is author of The Warehouse, Workers and Robots at Amazon. Welcome to This Is Hell, Allesandro.
Hey, hi. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you.
You know, we've had a lot of discussions about Amazon, but none in the way that we're going to be discussing it with you today. I just want to make sure everybody understands that even though there are a lot of books out, a lot of articles about Amazon, a lot of documentaries, this is one that is very different from others you will read. You mentioned how customers receive more mundane needs as demonstrated during the coronavirus pandemic. The consumption of food, clothing, or pharmaceuticals cannot be taken for granted. Our ability to consume is contingent and depends on complex global supply chains that can break down. Wherever our desire for consumption comes from, it must be fulfilled. How has the pandemic revealed any has the pandemic revealed any vulnerabilities of Amazon, or has it reaffirmed and reinforced our dependence on Amazon?
I think it's done both things. In the sense that it has revealed the human labor behind us receiving a package on our doorsteps, and the problems that the kind of labor the workers perform at Amazon, represent. And then it's also made us more dependent from Amazon and similar companies, especially Amazon, because of their business model was perfectly ready for something like this. More people ordering stuff online from home and not wanting to go to grocery stores or whatever other stores. So I think it's been both a boost for their business, but also in a sense a boost for their poor public image. So I want to say it's done both, revealing that what happens inside those places, but also making those places more important for us.
So it benefits from a period of crisis. That would suggest that in the future, with more and more effects from climate change, that Amazon will continue to benefit from crisis. Why is it seemingly invulnerable to crisis?
I'm not sure it's invulnerable, so we'll see on the long run what happens. But certainly it has profited from crisis in the past, and it may do so in the future. So I don't know if climate change is gonna favor Amazon, to be honest, but it's certainly a possibility. Certainly it has emerged from the .com bubble in the late 2000s, where most other e-commerce companies went bust, while Amazon had just gotten enough money to float above the crisis, and then sort of survive and incorporate some of the business models that other companies were developing before that bubble burst. So certainly there are precedents in terms of Amazon exploiting crisis or being more successful because of crisis. Certainly the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated their ability to reach more markets and to sell more stuff and to grow as a company. So they have definitely profited from this crisis a lot. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. We can imagine climate change helping Amazon in a sense. We can also imagine climate change disrupting their operations, or political upheavals coming generated by climate change also harming this company. So I really can't predict what's going to happen in the future, but certainly they've demonstrated they can actually profit from crisis. They've done that in the past for sure.
Why did they survive the tech bubble bust of the 2000s? Because I remember at the time talking to friends of mine who were in tech.
Just the right size, and they just collected enough money from investors to be able to not go bankrupt, while other companies that were basically based on the same business model, the idea of like selling stuff online, were less successful financially. So while Amazon was still very small, of course, during those days, it managed to capitalize on the crisis in terms of becoming one of the main, like finding itself being one of the main actors when other competitors had gone out of business. So certainly there was that for sure.
You also write that overnight, Amazon workers became essential. In March 2020, at the height of the first wave of the pandemic in COVID-19 ridden northern Italy, a courier shot a cell phone video while delivering for Amazon. It quickly went viral over messaging app WhatsApp. Amazon doesn't stop, the worker can be heard saying through his medical-grade face mask. Don't worry, you will receive your damn Hello Kitty phone cover on time. F you. Why do we not give an F about those who we call essential workers during the pandemic? Why didn't the public start only purchasing what was essential?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. I don't think I have an answer for that. I think we all found out all of a sudden that certain workers that we hadn't really paid much attention to, all of a sudden were essential. Our lives depended on them, and Amazon certainly wasn't the only company, or e-commerce was not the only industry certainly that kind of had this moment of revelation. But because of the size of this company and because of how important it became in terms of everyday consumption, I think there is something specific there in terms of how overnight, literally, millions of workers across the world found out that they had to work in unsafe conditions, and their work was more important than other people's work. So they could not shut down, for instance, they could not shut down their workplaces. So the sentence, the quote you read, is one of the, it's a funny one. It's one from a person who was mad because they had to drive around and deliver packages while the situation was still super unclear. There was this new disease, this new risk that nobody really know about, and these people could not stop working. Quite the opposite, and in some cases for very silly forms of consumption. So it was definitely, Amazon was never actually limited to crucial stuff we need for our survival. So the Hello Kitty phone cover has always been part of the company business model, even during the pandemic.
This book is really fascinating. One of the things about it is how it's like the Amazon model doesn't seem like it would work. You point out that in Piacenza, the town where you are from, Amazon became a heavy presence before the area was even an eligible destination for delivery. Boxes from MXP5, that's the fulfillment center there, went out to the more modern and busier metropolis of Milan, while we got the jobs, the downward wages and working conditions, and the environmental degradation. How important do you think that the downward pressure on wages and working conditions and environmental degradation, how important do you think that is to Amazon's profits and success? Is that why Amazon is profitable?
Definitely. So Amazon is successful because it can. Their business model is pretty simple in a sense. You order something online, they'll deliver it to you. So the way they remain, above their competitors is by making their process more efficient and their prices lower. And in order to do so, you have to unload some of this pressure onto the workers and or the environment. So certainly there are external effects in terms of environmental degradation, but also there are effects in terms of the workforce. So, for instance, we know that Amazon pays lower salaries than the average in the warehousing industry. So even though they may pay above minimum wage in some areas in the U.S., for instance, they try to do whatever they can to compress wages so they can actually sell stuff at a lower price. There is also something about positioning warehouses in places where they find both geographical or I want to say advantages in terms of the position of a warehouse. So it has to be at the outskirts of major metropolitan centers, so it can serve the urban wealthier market and at the same time find the workforce, masses of workers at the periphery of our urban centers. So there is something about unloading this pressure on wage and this environmental degradation onto the peripheries, onto our suburban world, vis-a-vis the consumption which tends to happen, downtown in urban centers. So there is something about the geography of Amazon that kind of reproduces some of the injustices that shape our cities and our countries.
And you point out that the first strike that happened at Amazon, you write, on November 24th, 2017, hundreds of MXP5, that's the code name of the facility near your hometown, where those workers went on strike. Unions had entered the company just a few months earlier. So why there? Why did the first ever strike against Amazon happen at the MXP5 warehouse in Castel San Giovanni in Italy's Po Valley?
That was the first strike in Italy. One of the first strikes, I think, that attracted global attention from the media. There had been, other strikes and other forms of worker action in other places before, especially I think in Germany. So it wasn't the first one, in absolute terms. So certainly was the one that made it one of the early strikes that made a splash on global media even. So all of a sudden you're in this like place in the middle of nowhere in Italy, like, very, sort of a provincial town in the middle of nowhere. And you have the Washington Post, which by the way is owned by Jeff Bezos, coming to town to interview union organizers and stuff like that. So it had a major visibility on the media. I think there were several reasons for that strike, and these are common reasons you will hear about in other instances of workers mobilizing at Amazon warehouses, especially rhythms of work, flexibility, control over shifts. So I think the most important thing for those workers at that point was, and still is in many cases, was trying to control the pressure coming from this just-in-time business model where someone can order something now and they want it delivered in 24 hours, 12 hours, 2 hours. So the increasingly unreasonable delivery times that Amazon promises to us are unloaded on the shoulders of workers, which means more hours, more flexibility, more overtime, more night shifts, more unpredictability. Maybe they'll tell me 10 minutes before my shift is over that I have to stay for 3 more hours. Or maybe they'll tell me, this morning that I have a night shift tonight. So I think the first strike was especially focused on improving workers' lives in terms of controlling this incredible flexibility they had to deal with.
Why 10 to 12-hour shifts? Why not 8-hour shifts? I never really understood that.
That really depends on the country and the labor or the state in the case of the U.S. And the labor laws. So whatever labor laws allow Amazon to do. In Italy, for instance, the regular shift is 8 hours, if not 7 hours. So that really depends on the country, especially that we're talking about. I think there is something about more than the length of the shifts. There is something about the flexibility needed from workers. So maybe the shift may be 8 hours, but then every other day they may ask you to stay for another couple of hours with without telling you in advance. So I think there is something about them needing to change the way in which the workforce operates, the sheer number of workers they have in a certain location, depending on orders. So they have this incredible need for flexibility, which is built upon forcing workers to be flexible.
You also write about how work at Amazon is precarious and unstable. But that's something another thing I haven't understood about Amazon. If work at Amazon is precarious and unstable, then how can it be efficient? And at the same time, their workers are in a position that is precarious and unstable.
Yeah, well, it is precarious and unstable in the sense that Amazon relies on a workforce composed by I want to say, give or take, half full-time workers they hire directly and half workers subcontracted from a temp agency. So especially the second half of the workforce is incredibly precarious. They may have contracts that are like weeks long, or not even that. We also know that the turnover is very, very, very high. So there are studies from the US that say that certain Amazon warehouses have a 200% turnover rate. So that means that each position is held by 3 people in a year on average. So each worker is replaced twice per year on average. So that's an incredible turnover rate. And what allows Amazon to thrive and be sufficient regardless of this turnover rate is its technological ability to organize labor through algorithms specifically. So the most important thing being that workers can learn to operate in an Amazon warehouse in minutes, literally, as long as you have computer literacy. You can operate like basic digital devices. You can be thrown in and start and become operative in minutes, if not or hours tops. So this is basically mostly because the knowledge about where the stuff is and where the stuff needs to go in the warehouse does not reside with workers. So workers don't have to learn the organization of the inventory in the warehouse. All that is outsourced to computer programs. So that knowledge resides on a database that Amazon owns and controls. And the algorithms that Amazon uses to organize labor will tell a worker through the device they use to work, go to second floor aisle X, box 95 and pick, retrieve this, I don't even know this, my USB microphone that Allesandro has ordered here. So this ability to organize labor technologically is what makes Amazon that efficient, I want to say, regardless of the turnover. Or if we want, we can even flip that and say that because of this technological ability, Amazon likes turnover and fosters turnover. So it wants its workers to be more precarious because it knows that it can control the labor process regardless of that. So having more precarious workers means having less union presence, having less problems with workers who slow down at a certain point in their career, having fewer problems with workers who decide not to buy into corporate culture anymore. So I think there is something about precarity being part of the reasons why Amazon is so efficient, and technology is a key part of this.
So how much is the Amazon model essentially a focus on undermining labor organizing?
Definitely, Amazon strives to be union-free wherever they operate. Just think about Seattle. Seattle is one of those. I think we can safely say that Seattle is one of the last strongholds of the union movement in the states, or at least one of the strongholds of the union movement in the states. And still, the thousands of workers Amazon has there, because of its headquarters are in Seattle, are not unionized. So there's zero union presence even in Seattle, let alone the remaining locations in the states. So U.S., Canada, no union presence. Europe is a different game because labor laws are less are not designed exactly to prevent union presence as they are in the States. So it's actually much easier to unionize a workplace in most countries in Europe. So there is a union presence definitely in Europe, but still Amazon strives even in Europe to try and limit worker power in its workplaces. So I think definitely one of the factors that Amazon keeps into account in terms of continuing being efficient and competitive is its ability to compress labor power and keeping it in its place.
And you describe it as 24/7, always on, crunch time obsessed, burnout prone culture. How can that always on, crunch time obsessed, burnout prone culture, how can that be sustainable? Or is that the whole point? It's meant to not be sustainable.
It doesn't have to be sustainable because Amazon can rely on turnover. Amazon can, as long as there is what Marx called the reserve army of like people looking for a job and being willing to take like that kind of job, Amazon will be okay with that because its technological ability to inject new workers onto the workforce and walk them into the warehouse and put them to work almost immediately. That will allow them to be successful regardless of turnover. So I think Amazon is okay with that because they know they can replace workers who are burnt out, who quit, who slow down, or who need to be kicked out because they slowed down too much.
And you mentioned the invisibility of Amazon workers and Amazon work to the outside community and to Amazon's customers. But you also mentioned that, quote, the technologies, management techniques, and cultural elements that impose productivity onto startup coders in Silicon Valley campuses are increasingly applied to more and more sectors of the workforce. So how aware or unaware are coders of the consequences of their coding on Amazon workers?
I think because especially the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, the problem with Amazon work has been made more and more public. So I think there's been more conversations in terms of like in different sectors of the workforce. So I think for the engineers and coders are more aware of what happens in those places. There has also been a wave of I want to say radicalization, or oh my God, this is not the word you would use in English with this meaning maybe, but politicization of the white collar engineers in Silicon Valley / other places like Seattle. So I think there is something about new movements within the workforce emerging, even within the engineers and the other workers working at the headquarters in Seattle. So I think there are forms of interclass solidarity, if you want to put it that way. So there is more consciousness that something is going on in those places, but there is also more direct connections among these two chunks of the workforce, engineers and warehouse workers, because of these changing politics of labor, which have been influencing the way in which even engineers in the last couple of years when actual direct political collaboration between warehouse workers and engineers in Seattle, which is very interesting.
And you also point out that amongst all of the different services that Amazon has, Amazon Web Services is the real moneymaker. Each dollar Amazon spends operating AWS generates 10 times more profit than a dollar spent on its other ventures. That is to say, while the fulfillment center and services like Prime Video turn over more money than Amazon Web Services, those services are not always profitable. How much does AWS depend upon workers? Is it profitable because it does not need as much human labor as warehouse work?
I think it is profitable because it provides the infrastructure, like a major chunk of the infrastructure that allows the internet to exist in the first place. So it is the main provider of web services in the world. So I think there is something about Amazon having built an infrastructural powerhouse upon which many other companies depend. So Uber runs on Amazon servers. Just an example. I think Airbnb too. It's a different platform. It's a different company, but it relies on Amazon Web Services for servers, for the web space, for the algorithms they run in order to run their operations. So there is something there about the position of that company, AWS, that service, in terms of, again, providing the infrastructure for the web. That's a very valuable position. There is human labor going into that. There is the human labor, of course, of programmers and coders and engineers who design those services and make them run. There is also the labor of other kinds of warehouse workers. So those who manage the so-called server farms. So these warehouses in the middle of nowhere where the servers are actually placed. So it's not as labor intensive, of course, as other, as the fulfillment centers where the stuff is the commodities are stored. So you may have just a handful of warehouse workers there, but it's a striking similarity. There is other warehouses with other warehouse workers, which is still run by Amazon, but they perform a very different job, which is maintaining the servers for AWS.
So when we see these ads on TV for jobs, when it comes to jobs at Amazon, we see these advertisements for it. Are those jobs that they're talking about, are they full-time Amazon jobs, part-time Amazon jobs? Because as you point out in your book, temporary workers make up the majority of warehouse workers, especially when it comes to holiday season. So if you right now were going to go get a job at Amazon, what's the likelihood that you would actually be employed by Amazon and not some hiring agency?
I think because now they're growing the workforce again for the holiday seasons. I think it would be it would be quite likely that you would be hired through a temp agency with a short time contract. Unless it's a new warehouse. So imagine they just open a fulfillment center near Chicago, then they also need the full time staff. So maybe they'll be hiring full timers right away. But In many jurisdictions, what they do is hire these flexible workforce, pretty much like double the size of the workforce in a given fulfillment center for the holiday season, and then will not fire. So people will basically be left at home. So I think working through a temp agency is also one of the paths in terms of getting a full-time contract later on. So for many temp workers, that was the hope. I'm gonna work. It's gonna be seasonal work initially, but hopefully they will actually hire me with a full-time contract, which is what happens in certain cases, of course.
But how likely is that?
Oh, well, that really depends on whether the warehouse is expanding. So if it's a new fulfillment center, if the market is expanding, then maybe they'll actually hire quite a few of those workers onto the more stable workforce. Like in my hometown in Piacenza, where the warehouse has been there for quite a while, and new warehouses are opening in the country. I've been told by workers that the new workers coming in as through temp agencies don't even hope anymore there's going to be a full-time job at the end of the line, because it's at the point the full-time workforce is pretty stable. So it's more about dealing with turnover. Those people also quit, but it's not about hiring masses of new people through that sort of path.
We are speaking with Allesandro Delfanti. He is author of The Warehouse, Workers and Robots at Amazon. You can follow Allesandro on Twitter at @Delfanti and find out more about Allesandro at his website, delfanti.org. You point out that Bezos himself has acknowledged repeatedly that, quote, "it's not easy to work here," emphasizing that sacrifice is part of what's requested of Amazon employees, from the warehouse all the way up to the shiny executive offices in Seattle. So are employees, were you directly asked to sacrifice for Amazon? Do workers not work but sacrifice? And if so, why are they told they should sacrifice for Amazon?
So I think there is definitely a sort of like the corporate culture influenced by, created by Jeff Bezos is one of sacrifice and burnout. And it's famously even executives will be yelled at and fired in the elevator in front of everyone else by Bezos. So there is something about this person and many other, figures like him in contemporary capitalism being obsessed with commanding the workforce and being able to dispose of the workers if they want to. So in terms of warehouse work, though, that's different. There is no Jeff Bezos yelling at you, but definitely there is a culture of sacrifice, in the sense that workers are told that they do this for the customers. So stuff like, okay, we have shipped 10,000 packages in our shift. That means that thousands of kids are going to be happy tomorrow because it's Christmas, for instance. So there's definitely something about moralizing their work in terms of providing this form of just-in-time consumption to the customers. So I think the company tries to portray that as being the main goal, rather than wealth per se, or the growth of the company, or anything inherent to the company itself. It's more about the customers. So that's something that definitely warehouse workers hear all the time. We have to do this because consumers depend on us. So you'll hear all sorts of stories in terms of how management moralizes warehouse work because of that connection with consumption.
On that moralization, you even point out that the company cultivates a workplace culture aimed at convincing workers that warehouse work is special and fun. And you get that feeling from the advertisements we're seeing in the States right now when it comes to Amazon advertising for jobs. You continue that a combination that can be settling. And this is just the warm-up. Amazon has plans for a future fulfillment center that is even more technology intensive, where its domination over the workforce is even stricter and the labor process is increasingly automated. So when you were working there, I mean, you point out that employer turnover is high by design, as the warehouse quickly discards and replaces workers worn out by the dictated pace. So how unsettling was the message that work is fun when it's grueling and low paid?
Yeah. So sorry, just to clarify, I didn't work at Amazon myself. I've been in those places several times. I've interviewed many workers. I've gone through the selection process a couple of times, but I've never actually worked myself
I knew you went through the
in an Amazon
process.
warehouse.
I knew you went through the employment
But
process, so I thought that you had been hired as well. So my mistake.
oh, nope. Oh, never mind. It can be unsettling because of this contrast, like you said, between the conditions of work, the rhythms, uh, the punishments that you can encounter in terms of being told you're not doing well enough, you're not fast enough, or even not your contract not being renewed if you work through a temp agency, and on the other hand, this more flashier this flashier image that Amazon tries to portray in terms of what being an Amazon warehouse workers means in the first place. So they're one of the main slogans they have is this: work hard, have fun, make history. And you'll see it painted on the walls of any Amazon fulfillment center, like over and over again, all over the place. It's one of the first. Certainly, it tends to be the first thing you see when you walk into one. So the work hard part of the equation is very clear. They have to work hard. The have fun part of the equation is something more unexpected, if you wish. So workers don't know necessarily when they enter those places that that's going to be the deal. That they have to have fun. So there is definitely something coming from. It's not unique to Amazon. This is like basic corporate culture in a sense. But there is something about trying to uh, uh, create the feeling of a community, do fun activities together, ranging from stretching in the morning to pizza parties by night. There is something about trying to convince people that because of the technologically advanced form of labor that happens in those places, Amazon is cooler than other companies. So it's a privilege to work at Amazon, vis-a-vis working at any other, company that deals with warehousing. So that's very interesting because they project onto warehouse workers this aura of cool that I think comes from like Silicon Valley, big tech sort of culture. Certainly works for engineers who are hired, at Google and work at the Googleplex, Google's headquarters, where you have all sort of toys, and it's your workplace is designed to look as a playground. So I think we've all seen images of like these big tech companies trying to make their workplaces appear cool to engineers so they can actually recruit people more easily. So the Amazon warehouses in a sense try to mimic that a little bit. So you'll have games, you'll have chocolate days where everyone is given free whatever quality chocolate. You'll have, again, group activities, community activities. So I think the warehouse is also designed to look as a playground, and that fosters this myth of Amazon being more fun, more playful, and cooler to work at.
So a culture of cool they're trying to sell, and you point out when we think of work under digital capitalism, we tend to imagine urban, hyper-connected labor, regardless of whether it's coders in San Francisco, food delivery couriers in Berlin, or social media content moderators in Delhi. Piacenza is hardly on the map, but it is an example of the suburban periphery where a new landscape of work is taking shape. This has been in development for a while now. How has Amazon's digital capitalism changed not only the work landscape in Piacenza, but also the environmental and cultural landscape? This is an area that used to be a hub for agriculture, and now it's a hub for logistics. So how does it change the culture in your hometown?
Yeah, it's not just Amazon. So Piacenza, my hometown, as well as many other places around the world, especially again like around major metropolitan centers, have been turned into warehousing, logistics hubs. So Amazon is one of the players in that place. So you'll see the same sort of landscape reproduced in other places. So Joliet around Chicago, or the Mississauga near Toronto. So you'll see places at the periphery of major metropolitan centers which have become logistics hubs. So it's the same for my hometown. So I think there is something about like political decisions made to taken in order to attract new warehouses, new players in the sector, and that has had major repercussions in terms of changing the composition of the workforce in the area. So all of a sudden, warehousing, logistics have become one of the main industries there. So we're talking about like thousands of people working in the industry in a province that's pretty small. So it's become a sensible industry there. There's something about attracting migrant labor. So lots of these jobs are taken up by migrant workers who tend to be racialized, who tend to be newcomers to the country. So there's something about raising the number of the migrant population in a certain area. So the province of Piacenza has become one of the areas in Italy with the highest percentage of foreign citizens, I think. So there is something about that for sure. It's also changed the politics of the place. So because of the heavy, massive presence of warehouses, because of the presence of this new massive migrant workforce, there has been new political actors popping up. So new unions focusing specifically on warehousing and being built and organized by migrant workers, which has been pretty exciting. So I think there is economic changes, there is political changes, there is even demographic changes that all go together with the arrival of Amazon and other similar companies in a certain area.
So Amazon provides precarious work and eventually needs more workers than the local population can supply in the case of what's happening in the Po Valley, bringing in migrant workers, as you were just saying, who are in turn blamed for the precarious lives of white Amazon workers. How much of an obstacle is that racial dynamic to labor organizing?
Well, that depends. I think some of the mainstream traditional unions have had a hard time organizing precarious workers in the first place, even more so migrant precarious workers. So they're trying, they're doing their best. In some cases, they're successful. But then on the other hand, you have the emergence of new worker organizations, which, like I said, are built by migrant workers themselves. So I think there is something very interesting, especially in my province, in Piacenza, my province, where I think you could say this for many other areas in the world. A very interesting phenomenon where instead of stealing your jobs, stealing the jobs of like the old stock white Italian workers, these workers are raising the bar for workers' rights for everyone, even for the white workers who had forgotten how to struggle and strike and win, and who had been willing to accept any conditions. So I think the picture is flipped in a sense. So these racialized migrant workers are actually helping even the more traditional working class white workers to actually get better rights and better working conditions. So that's very interesting to me. It's not like the left necessarily acknowledges this, the more institutional kind of part of the left, but it's certainly a dynamic that many people have pointed out.
And you also mentioned that besides the jobs, trucks, and concrete, what Amazon brought to Piacenza and where it brings it to when it comes to any town and to the dozens of other suburban areas which host its warehouses is a myth, a promise of modernization, economic development, and even individual emancipation that stems from the disruptive nature of a company heavily based on the application of new technology to both consumption and work. It is a promise that assumes that the society in question is willing to entrust such ambitions to the gigantic multinational corporations that design, implement, and possess technology. So why is being disruptive seen as a good thing when disruption has made fortunes for owners and investors but led to precarity for workers who far outnumber owners and investors?
Yeah, I think there is something, like I said, about this aura of myth coming from technologically advanced production. This is something that we're witnessing this happening with digital capitalism and like the offerings of digital capitalism in terms of workplace culture or these dreams of modernization. But this is not necessarily new. So sociologists, for instance, like analyzing industrial capitalism in the 60s, have pointed out similar phenomena where working at Fiat to stay with an Italian example, or Ford to use an American example, was something interesting, not only because of the material benefits but also because of the workers' ability to participate in a new form of industry that's more modern, more contemporary, growing, changing quickly, improving quickly. So there was a promise there in terms of the participation to technological advanced production that's been there for the introduction of industrial capitalism and some of the technological changes brought in by industrial capitalism. We're seeing now the same thing happening with digital capitalism. The problem is that myths are not something people just blindly believe in. So I think these myths that are put forward by corporations are also challenged because of this newly acquired visibility in terms of the poor conditions of work in those warehouses that we've seen in the last, especially 2-3 years, emerge in the press, in the public discourse, and blah blah blah. So I think there's a clash between this myth pushed by corporations and the material conditions on the ground, but there is also a clash between this myth and the way in which work in those places is actually seen in the public sphere and debated in the public sphere. So I think that they start having a hard time pushing that ideology onto us.
You also mentioned that customers provide labor too for Amazon, albeit unpaid, by allowing the company to use the data it generates by monitoring their behavior. For instance, when Alexa records their conversations, or when they review products on Amazon.com, or in Italy, Amazon.it. How much does Amazon depend on the free labor of customers for their success?
I think it's an important part of what they do, and this is in this sense, Amazon is no different from like other big tech corporations, especially social media services, Google, and all of them. So there is. I think we all know very well at this point that whatever we do online or through our smartphones is monitored. Data are extracted and then crunched by algorithms, and they are used to, at the very least, to improve the service that a company provides to us. So certainly people have argued that this should be seen as unpaid labor we perform for the company, which helps sharpen their technology, which helps improve the service they provide. So Amazon is no different there in a sense. So whatever you do on Amazon, be it talk to your Alexa, or order something online, or use a website that they host, will provide data that's valuable and that they will use to improve their services and thus make more money. So you could characterize that as a form of unpaid labor that we all provide to big tech companies, for sure.
But that's kind of, covert data mining. To you, what explains why consumers so often give away their labor for free? For instance, here in the States, I don't know if this is, well, you've seen it probably in Canada, the line for the self-checkout at stores is often the longest line. Why are consumers not only willing to give their labor away for free, but also take paying jobs away from people who need them?
Yeah, I'm not sure that consumers want to do that. I think foster people's participation. So I don't think it's a matter of like us wanting to use a self-checkout, as consumers, or wanting our data to be captured by Facebook so they can actually sell us better advertisements or something like that. It's that these technologies, these services are designed so that they attract people's participation and they profit from it. So I don't think anyone online at the self-checkout is consciously thinking, "Oh, I wanna try and contribute to getting rid of one job at this supermarket." Right? That's not the point. I think there is something about employers deploying those technologies so that consumers help them get rid of some of the workers. It's not our choice as consumers.
So why don't we connect those actions to those consequences?
You need a psychologist here, I think. But the power of consumption in our culture is so high that we tend to give it primacy over any thought we give about labor, and this has been a problem for decades. And other people have thought about that. I'm not sure I'm in a position to give you a smart answer here, but certainly it's a problem. Like, you're thinking you can solve stuff by changing your consumption patterns. This has been challenged by lots of people, regardless of whether this is about worker rights or exploitation of natural resources or climate change. Our individual consumption patterns are not the point. The point is the systemic change. So I think this is something bigger than Amazon and bigger than me for sure.
See, we didn't need a psychologist. That was a fantastic answer. So you write the idea of redemption through work is nothing new. On the contrary, it is a damnation common to modern society. What do you mean by the idea of redemption through work being a damnation, an eternal hellish punishment?
Oh my God, this is my background as someone coming from sort of the autonomist crowd in Italy, where there's this tradition of like thinking that maybe work shouldn't be that central in our lives. Maybe it should be its presence in our lives should be limited. So I think it comes from my in a sense my own sort of ideas about what's important in someone's life. So I think Amazon is one of the examples of, on the contrary, of the expansion of work to new spheres. So for instance, like Amazon workers' inability to say no to overtime, or Amazon workers bringing home some of the cultural elements they encounter in the warehouse. So, for instance, using Amazon slogans at home with their kids, because that's the way they are. They're familiarized with doing stuff in the warehouse 10 or 12 hours a day. So I think there is something about Amazon expanding the reach of work onto our lives more in general, and that's something I don't necessarily like. And also because of this idea that I think Amazon pushes, like if you get a job at Amazon, your life is gonna improve because because of this promise of modernization, dealing with high tech. Organization of labor, this promise of redemption. You can use this job to actually progress in life, build a career for yourself. All that stuff tends to be compressed in the sphere of labor, and I think there is so much more in our lives that is not captured by that sphere. So that's I think why I wrote that sentence.
So if Amazon is so exploitative and controlling of their workers, could its business model survive labor organizing or unionization? How bad would labor organizing be for Amazon's bottom line? Could it even survive labor organizing?
I'm sure it can survive labor organizing. I mean, the profits they're making are so high, they could basically give tens of thousands of dollars to each and every Amazon workers per year on top of what they're already making, and nothing will happen to their bottom line. So there is something about the sheer amount of money they make that would allow them to do whatever they want. So they could easily pay twice as much. No, I don't think it will be a problem there. Then in terms of remaining competitive, that's a different game maybe. So maybe there is something about them needing to compress salaries and needing to improve technology because the edge they have is very minimal, vis-a-vis their competitors. So everyone is playing catch-up game with Amazon. So other companies are trying to be more efficient, faster, smarter. So in a sense, it's an evolving market. So they sure need to be careful there. But I'm not sure that unionization will kill them. So this is something we've seen over and over again in the history of capitalism. Companies may start like this, high turnover, churning out people, unsafe labor. But then once workplaces are unionized and industries are unionized, what happens is that there is a new agreement between labor and capital, and maybe salaries go up a little bit, and technology is used in a slightly different way, and everyone is happy. So I don't think unionization will kill Amazon. Unionization may normalize Amazon. Unionization may change some of the most outstandingly bad features of what it means to work for them. So this is something we've seen in Amazon warehouses that have been unionized. A little bit of control over work rhythms, slightly higher salaries, maybe less flexibility. So unions have like very definite goals, and I don't think they'll kill Amazon. Maybe they'll make it a better place.
factory workers 100 years ago, 50 years ago, likely even today, work hard so their kids don't have to work in factories. At least that's how it was in my family and where I grew up in Detroit. So you write how Amazon was based on the over 100-year-old idea of the mail order catalog. To what extent is Amazon nothing really new or innovative? It's just a continuation of factory work, only digitized and more automated. Is it the same capitalism, only with a different technology?
I think you could say, and people are saying that digital capitalism is a continuation of industrial capitalism. So it's new technologies that are built on top of pre-existing technologies that have been used by industrial capitalism for a century and a half. So I think you could certainly say that. I think what's interesting is that some of these technologies or techniques, it's not just about material technologies like computers. It's also about ways of organizing labor. Are expanding beyond the factory. So that's interesting. Like, for instance, Taylorism, the idea you can strictly monitor what a worker does, count their output, control their output, and monitor the movements, and then use that information to downstream to improve the labor process and make it more efficient. That stuff has been present in factories for a century. Or almost a century. It's digitized, so now digital technologies allow management to extract those kind of data automatically rather than sending around managers with stop clock So instead of sending around managers with a stop clock, you can actually automate this stuff by having technology and algorithms do that for you. But the idea is the same. The difference is this logic is expanding beyond factories, so warehousing, but also the gig economy. Many other forms of labor are now strictly monitored, quantified, and then the data generated by this monitoring is used to improve the efficiency of the system downstream. So this is something Amazon is at the forefront of outside of manufacturing, outside of factories.
So just a couple more questions for you. You write how in its projects for the warehouse of the future, Amazon imagines and desires a workplace where these trends are expanded and where human labor is even more subordinate to machines. So what's worse, Allesandro, being subordinate to machines or being replaced by them?
Oh boy, I don't know if I have an answer to that. So what I did is I looked at patents that Amazon owns for technology it may develop in the future and introduce in the warehouse in the future. So I basically went through hundreds of patents that they own for robots and stuff like that. And it's very interesting that they assume that human labor will be present in the warehouse of the future. So while they own patents for drones, robots, any sort of automated technology that may replace a worker, they also acknowledge in those very patents that the workers are still going to be there. So I think it's about displacement. I think it's about changing the ways in which people work, maybe reducing the number of workers, or at least making them more efficient because of these new collaborations with automated technologies like robots and algorithms. But I think they know that human labor will be present even in the warehouse of the future. So I think most of the technologies are about humans tending to robots, helping robots, algorithms controlling and monitoring even more strictly what human workers do, and then using that information to train robots, for instance. So I think there is certainly an acknowledgement in those patents, in the plans that Amazon has for the future, or the desire that Amazon has for the future, that living labor, human labor will still be there. Maybe not the same kind of labor. Which kind of labor? That's a political question. If you leave it to them, then it could be more of the same. If we fight them and we build worker power, then maybe that future can be discussed can be decided by workers too, not only by corporations.
One last question for you, Allesandro. We have been speaking with Allesandro Delfanti, author of The Warehouse, Workers and Robots at Amazon. Even if you've read any other books or seen any other documentaries or read articles about Amazon, you should definitely check out Allesandro's books. It come from a completely different perspective. You can follow Allesandro on Twitter at @Delfanti, and you can find out more about him at delfanti.org. One last question for you, and as we do with all of our guests, I promise, Allesandro, it is what we call the question from hell, the question we may hate to ask, you may hate to answer, or our audience is going to hate your response. And I think the last category is the one that this is going to fall in. You were just talking about change. Now that Jeff Bezos is gone, he's no longer the CEO of Amazon. He left in 2021. Is there any indication that Amazon will change and not be so bad for their employees in offices as well as in warehouses?
No, not yet. I don't know. I don't know and I doubt that this will change because of like a new person at the helm of the corporation. So I think that would, if Amazon were to change, that would be as a result of social and political forces, the government breaking them down, workers increasing the rate of resistance, and maybe changing things. I don't think it's going to happen because of like some change at the top of the corporation, for sure.
Allesandro, I cannot thank you enough for being on our show this week. This is really a fascinating read, and I truly appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care. Have a good week.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
You've been listening to a This Is Hell interview. For more interview hell and to support the show, visit thisishell.com.